Chairman. Mr. Attorney General, yesterday the Justice Department announced the creation of a nearly $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund to compensate individuals who were purportedly targeted by the Biden administration, in exchange for which President Trump dropped his $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS for the completely inappropriate leak of the president and his organization's tax data. Amounts for this new fund will come from the Judgment Fund, a permanent law appropriation for paying claims and settlements brought against the United States government. Amounts in the Judgment Fund have traditionally been used for the payment of specific claims against the government or amounts owed for the settlement of those claims, but not for future claims that have yet to be bought. So I have some questions for you. First, has the DOJ ever used amounts in the Judgment Fund to pay claims that have yet to be brought against the United States government based on the settlement of a completely unrelated case?
Attorney General, thank you. I recognize now the Chairwoman of the full committee, Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Attorney General, yesterday the Justice Department announced the creation of a nearly $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund to compensate individuals who were purportedly targeted by the Biden administration, in exchange for which President Trump dropped his $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS for the completely inappropriate leak of the president and his organization's tax data. Amounts for this new fund will come from the Judgment Fund, a permanent law appropriation for paying claims and settlements brought against the United States government. Amounts in the Judgment Fund have traditionally been used for the payment of specific claims against the government or amounts owed for the settlement of those claims, but not for future claims that have yet to be bought. So I have some questions for you. First, has the DOJ ever used amounts in the Judgment Fund to pay claims that have yet to be brought against the United States government based on the settlement of a completely unrelated case?
Thank you, Senator. So the short answer is yes. I mean, we have done this in the past. This was done during the Obama administration, something almost identical in structure to what we announced yesterday. In that case, there were allegations made by Native Americans that the Department of Agriculture had systematically treated them unfairly, and some had filed claims. There was a pending lawsuit, but many had not. A fund very similar to the one that was established yesterday was set up. It was funded by, in today's dollars, a little over $1 billion. And a single claims commissioner was appointed to review the claims and to distribute funds. In that case, at the end, there was around $300 million left over. And the Obama administration had set it up so that that money from the Judgment Fund was distributed to nonprofits and other NGOs. So what we've done with this fund, and by the way, it is true that this is unusual. That is true. But it is not unprecedented, and it was done to address something that had never happened again either. So there is an unprecedented nature of what we did yesterday in response to years and years of weaponization. Just to correct a few things, Senator, it's not limited to Republicans. It's not limited
I didn't
to
say
Biden.
that was.
It's not limited to the Biden weaponization. It's not limited to, in any way, scope or form to January 6th or to Jack Smith. There's no limitation on the on the claims. And the other thing we've done, just to finish up in comparison to what was done previously, is we intend to appoint 5 commissioners. And also, at the end, the money goes back to any leftover funds go back to the federal government, not to nonprofits.
So how will the commission that you've just referenced that oversees the fund determine whether future claims from the fund are eligible to be paid out of it? And how will they determine how much will be paid for each claim? What's the legal basis for those decisions?
So there's commissions that are established all the time where a commissioner is charged with determining the correct amount, if any, to repay a claimant who's asking for funds. So in this case, what we expect is the commissioners will take in information. It's entirely voluntary if an individual wants to apply and assert that they were a victim of weaponization. And the commission can do anything according to what was set up yesterday, from issuing an apology to the claimant to awarding compensation and the monetary compensation. So it depends on the claim, and there will be 5 commissioners who will review each claim. It won't be reviewed by me. It won't be reviewed by others in the administration. It'll be reviewed by the 5 commissioners.
Aren't those commissioners appointed by the president?
No, they're
Who
appointed
are
by,
they appointed by?
4 of them are appointed by the Attorney General, and 1 of them is appointed by the Attorney General in consultation with leadership of this body.
Will the information related to the claims be publicly reported?
So that's a good question. I mean, look, there's privacy laws that exist, so I don't want to sit here today and say every scintilla of data collected will be released, but of course, there's accountability that the commission has, a quarterly report that has to come to the Attorney General, which will certainly be public. There's a process that you all will get information, and there's a FOIA process. So I very much anticipate that the claims that are awarded, the basis and the amount will for sure be made public along the way.
Let me switch to a different issue which Chairman Moran brought up. Along with Chairman Moran and other members of this committee, I was one of the lead sponsors of the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization of 2022. These programs are critical to reducing violence against women, ensuring that justice is served, and strengthening services to victims and survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. In Maine, the Rural Victims Program is especially critical. Despite the importance and effectiveness of these programs, the department's budget request proposes reducing funding by about 25%. Why is the department proposing a reduction in funding to combat domestic violence and to support survivors?
Well, first of all, I completely agree with you that these are extraordinarily important programs, and the funds are well used to support these programs. We have asked for $539 million, I believe, in money to support all these programs, and that. I mean, look, there's a lot of money that goes, $190 million for grants to combat, to stop, the stop grants, which is extraordinarily important. And so it is a priority. Obviously, we have to make choices, and the president's budget has to make choices on where to spend that money, but it is extraordinarily important, and the $539 million that we've asked for will go to support all these programs. I mean, so yes, we are asking for less money than the budget had last year, but it's not because we don't view it as extraordinarily important.
Well, I would suggest that cutting the budget for these important programs by 25% is a huge cut. And I hope that's something the subcommittee will take a close look at. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, everybody, lock in and look closely at this Senate Appropriations Committee hearing, because what we are watching here is a high-stakes, multi-billion-dollar shell game being exposed on the record. This isn't just a standard, boring review of mundane government agency paperwork. This is an unsanitized, high-voltage clash occurring right here in May of 2026 over the literal hijacking of the U.S. Treasury's judgment fund to finance a political payout. To understand the massive institutional friction in this room, you have to look at who is doing the talking. On one side of the dais, you have Senator Susan Collins of Maine. Collins is the chairwoman of the full Appropriations Committee. She is a master of the federal budget, a classic institutionalist, and she views the power of the purse as the ultimate constitutional check on executive overreach. On the other side, at the witness table, sits Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, the fiercely loyal former defense attorney for Donald Trump, who has been installed at the top of the Department of Justice to completely reshape the department's legal priorities. This is a head-on collision between a protective legislator and an executive branch attorney running a legal cleanup operation. Let's tear down the opening chess moves of this interaction, because Collins lays out the forensic details of the deal with devastating clarity. Just 24 hours prior to this hearing, the DOJ announced a nearly $1.88 billion anti-weaponization fund. Why? Because it was the exact price tag required to get President Trump to drop his personal $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS over the leak of his tax data. Collins points out that the DOJ is pulling this $1.88 billion out of the judgment fund, a permanent, automatic pot of money meant to pay legal settlements brought against the U.S. government. But here is the massive diagnostic catch that Collins drops like a hammer. The judgment fund is strictly built to pay out existing, specific, verified claims. It is completely illegal to use it as a pre-funded reservoir for future, unfiled claims that haven't even been brought to court yet. She hits Blanche with a direct question. Has the DOJ ever used amounts in the judgment fund to pay claims that have yet to be brought based on the settlement of a completely unrelated case? Watch the defense Blanche attempts to mount here. It is a brilliant study in political misdirection. He looks at Collins and flatly says, the short answer is yes. He tries to validate this unprecedented maneuver by pointing back to the Obama administration, claiming they did something almost identical when the Department of Agriculture settled a massive, systemic discrimination lawsuit brought by Native American farmers. But let's look at the unsanitized reality that Blanche tries to skate over. In the Obama-era case, there was an active, decades-long, structurally unified class action lawsuit where thousands of specific individuals had documented systemic discrimination by a government agency. What Blanche's DOJ did here is fundamentally different. They took one man's personal, private lawsuit against the IRS and used the settlement of that single case to build a massive, permanent slush fund for an entire class of political allies to claim they were victims of weaponization. Even Blanche has to look up and admit, it is true that this is unusual. That is true. He tries to soften the blow by claiming the fund is completely nonpartisan and open to anyone, and notes that unlike the Obama administration settlement, any leftover cash at the end will flow back to the federal government rather than nonprofits. Collins doesn't buy the spin for a second. She immediately pivots to the operational mechanics of this new fund, demanding to know what legal basis a panel of 5 commissioners will use to determine who gets a piece of this $1.88 billion pie. Blanche admits that the process is entirely voluntary and that the commissioners have total, unchecked discretion. They can do anything from issuing a formal government apology to cutting massive monetary compensation checks entirely at their own whim. When Collins asks if the commissioners are just presidential puppets, Blanche quickly tries to shield the administration from a direct conflict of interest, stating that the Attorney General appoints 4 of them, and the 5th is chosen in consultation with Senate leadership. He also swears that quarterly reports and FOIA requests will ensure transparency, but refuses to promise that the public will see every piece of data. This is where the hearing takes a brilliant, devastating turn. Collins completely shifts the lens from high-level political payouts to the raw reality of the federal budget. She notes that she was a lead sponsor of the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA, reauthorization of 2022, programs that are absolutely vital for reducing domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking across rural states like Maine. Collins looks at Blanche and drops a brutal metric on the desk, while the DOJ magically found $1.88 billion for this new anti-weaponization fund. Their active budget request proposes slashing funding to combat domestic violence and support survivors by a staggering 25%. Look at the absolute hypocrisy that Collins forces into the light here. She forces the acting attorney general to sit there on camera and justify cutting funds for battered women by a quarter, while simultaneously financing a multi-billion-dollar fund for political grievances. Blanche completely fumbles the response, retreating into standard, empty bureaucratic platitudes. He says, obviously we have to make choices. It's not because we don't view it as extraordinarily important. Collins cuts him off cleanly, declaring that a 25% cut is a huge cut that her committee will personally take a close look at fixing. When you watch this entire 8-minute interaction play out, see it for what it truly is, a terrifying diagnostic check on the breakdown of constitutional norms in 2026. It shows an administration willing to starve critical, life-saving domestic safety programs to fund a highly politicized, structurally unprecedented payout mechanism designed to settle personal legal scores, leaving the integrity of the federal treasury and the law completely fractured in its wake.